we talked about the two routes in which we could complete an IPO. Under route 1, you have to satisfy certain eligibility criteria, which included having net worth, net tangible assets, and ensuring that 50% of your total assets are monetizable assets. Once you satisfy those requirements, you could then go ahead and fix the price of your own company's shares yourself. Otherwise, you would then have to do the option 2, where you cannot fix the price. You would end up doing what is called as book building process. So that was your initial issue. Today we're going to learn what is a fast track way of doing the same, which is the fast track regulation number 155. This is only applicable for companies that have already completed a successful IPO. So whether through route 1 or route 2, you have successfully got an IPO done. You have raised some money and you have utilized 75% of that money for the project that you have promised that you will utilize the same for. And the remaining 25% you can use it for general corporate purposes. Once you've done that, for another 12 months, obviously you cannot raise any further money. But after the 12-month period, if your company wants to raise even more money from the market because your IPO was successful, you can either go back and use the same route as route 1 and route 2, or you can use a fast track or a faster way of doing a public issue. This is applicable only for public issue. This doesn't apply for the other 3 types of issue. Do we remember what the other 3 types of issue are? First is public. What are the others?
Rights issue, preferential issue, and bonus issue.
Yes, and under preferential issue also you have 3 varieties. What are they?
Traditional, QIP, and private placement.
Yeah. Yes, this chapter is so critical for understanding this entire syllabus that if you understand even this one chapter, you could actually end up writing something or the other about every other chapter that is involved. That is how critical this chapter is. That's why we're going slower than usual, because typically we can finish 1 chapter per class. But this time we're taking 2 classes just to be sure that we understand everything clearly. Once we finish these chapters, we can easily finish the rest of the syllabus by the end of October. So now coming to the FPO portion. Now public issue we already know is of 2 types, IPO and FPO. If the IPO is successful, then only you can do an FPO. And for doing the FPO, you have the original route and you have the faster route. It's called as the fast track route. Only companies that have 1,000 crores of market capitalization. That's a huge number to have in terms of market capitalization. Now, how do you compute market capitalization? You take the latest market price and you multiply it by the number of shares that the company has issued and outstanding. That gives you the market cap number. So only the largest of the large companies in India are even eligible to do this fast track issue. Obviously, all your shares should be in demat form, which is the case anyways. And you should have been listed on the stock exchange for at least 3 years preceding your FLC. So you can't even do it after the 12 month. You have to wait for another 2 years. And 3 years time, if you're a new company which did its IPO very recently, you should have a listing track record of 3 years. So first is listing track record of 3 years. Your share should be in demat form. Your market cap should be 1,000 crores. Your total trading turnover on an annualized manner, that is in a year, how much money is generated from the buying and selling of your shares, that should be at least 2% of the weighted average number of equity shares listed during the 6 months period. This is nothing but a fancy way of saying that if you have listed 100 shares on the stock exchange, people should have at least bought and sold 2 out of those shares in the last 6 months, which is very easy to achieve actually. So your shares should have changed hands 2% of the time on average in the last 6 months. Otherwise, it shows that nobody's interested in your company or your company shares. This is in case of normal companies. Normal companies have a minimum public shareholding of 25% and a minimum promoter shareholding of 20%, which is locked in for 3 years, which we saw day before yesterday. But if your company for some reason has a public shareholding of less than 15%, which is the lowest it can go, then the annual turnover for your securities can only be 2%, but this time instead of the annualized trading turnover, you only take the 6-month trading period. So 2% shares should have been bought and sold in the entire 1-year period if you're a normal company. But for some reason, if your public shareholding is not 25, if it is 15%, then it should be 2% in the last 6 months. So trading turnover should be 2% in the last 1 year or in the last 6 months, depending on what type of company you are. If your minimum public shareholding is 25% or more, then you maintain it for 1 year. If it is less than 15%, then you only can do it for 6-month period. Whatever shares that are being delivered to your buyers and sellers of equity shares, those shares should be at least 10% of the annualized trading turnover. So in 1 year, let's say if your company's 10,000 shares were sold, 10% of this is going to be 1,000. At least 1,000 shares should have been actually delivered. Why delivery is more important is many people do what is called as short selling. They will sell something that they don't have, and then they buy that particular share to offset that particular transaction. If they feel the price is right, stock market allows them to do so. The concept of selling and then buying a security just to make short-term profits in an intraday transaction is called as short selling. Many traders do that in India, and if your company's shares are only being short sold, then it's not a good sign for you. So they say at least 10% of your overall turnover in terms of trading should be delivery based trading. They should actually be delivered to the final investor. Also, you have to be in compliance with the SEBI regulations that we have already seen. Once you become a listed company, to become a listed company, you follow ICDR regulations. But after you become a listed company, you follow LODR regulations, which is your next chapter. So you should be in compliance. You should be a listed company for how many years? What was the first qualification criteria? Your listing track record should be there for a minimum of how many years, Bhuvaneshwari? It was 3 years before, which was the very first point. Your listing track record should be there for 3 years. Your share should be listed on the stock exchange for 3 years. During those 3 years, you should be in compliance with the SEBI LODR regulation, listing obligation and disclosure requirement regulations of 2015. This is where appointment of a CS is made compulsory for listed companies. This is that regulation. We'll speak in the next chapter. So not only should you be listed for 3 years, you should be compliant for all the 3 years that you are being listed. And let's say you are listed for 10 years. And let's say you had a non-compliance issue 5 years ago. That's still okay because for the last 3 years, you have not had any compliance issue. So at least the last 3 years of your entire journey as a listed company, you should not have had any listing agreement compliance issues. In addition to this, 95% of all your investor complaints should be resolved in the immediately preceding month of whatever date you decide to deliver the FPO. There should be no pending litigation or show cause notices against your company. There should not be any alleged violations also against not only your company but also the promoter group. They should not be subjected to any disciplinary measures in the last 3 years. Basically, you should be a clean company. If you look at all these points, you should be a compliant, law-abiding, regulation-following company in the last 3 years, which has no conflicts of interest between their holding, subsidiary, and associate entities. And your auditor also agrees with the same. And he should have provided an audit report confirming this. If you satisfy these conditions, which conditions you have a listing track record of 3 years, you have dematerialized shares, you have 1,000 crores market cap, 2% of your shares are traded regularly, 10% of your shares are delivered regularly. In the last 3 years, you're compliant with SEBI regulations. 95% of your investor complaints are resolved. You have no pending show cause notices or litigation against your company or your promoters. There are no disciplinary measures taken against your company or your promoters in the last 3 years. You have no conflict of interest between the intermediaries as well as your holding subsidiary and associate companies, and your auditor agrees with the same. If you satisfy these conditions and you have a market cap of 1,000 crores, then you can do fast track issue. Now you might be wondering, all this drama about fast track issue, how can you do it faster? That they didn't mention it in the chapter itself. Right? If you notice, they immediately move to rights issue. So what is the thing that makes this faster? If you remember, you had 2 types of offer document that you have to file. First, you file it with whom? Draft offer document is filed with SEBI. Final offer document is filed with
ROC, stock exchange, and
SEBI, ROC, and the stock exchange. So how does a fast track issue become faster? There is no requirement for this. There is no draft prospectus filing requirement. You can directly file your final prospectus. So technically, how much time are you saving? You're saving 30 days. That's all. Because if you remember, first SEBI, if you file the draft prospectus, they'll read it, they'll give comments. You have to make those changes and file the final prospectus within 30 days, right? Since draft prospectus requirement itself is not there now, you can directly file the final prospectus and SEBI will approve it if you satisfy these 12 points that we just saw. And that is what is called as fast track issue. Very, in-demand topic from an exam perspective, because not a lot of people go too in-depth in studying these 2-3 chapters and they end up scoring ridiculously low marks because of the same reason. So make sure that you cover this particular topic in detail whenever you get a chance to display your superiority of knowledge in the exam paper. Always write in a clean and precise manner. Keep the points short. Nobody's going to read the textbook anyways. Everybody needs short notes anyways. So remember that everybody is in the same boat. So you don't have to panic at all. Every student is in the same boat. So all you need to do is be clear with what your objective is and go and deliver under pressure. I know it's very easy to say, but from experience, the people with the better writing skills always perform better than people with better knowledge. I know lots of CSs who have 10 times better knowledge than me, but they're stuck with either their original CA degree or they're having some other professional degree and they are not able to finish CS at all. And the only reason is writing skills. And I've already given you the tools to resolve that. Download the apps that I mentioned before, like Elevate, which will help you in writing. Unless you're a good writer, your knowledge is useless, both to the society and to the CS Institute or any other professional institute. Develop your writing skills, write concisely, make flowcharts, diagrams, quote examples, connect topics with each other. That's what's going to get you through this particular examination. It's not even halfway there. The real exam is after this, which is going to come for CS professional. So hopefully most of you stick around. The rest of the chapter is pretty straightforward. Next is rights issue. Rights issue is an issue which is only given to existing shareholders on a pro rata basis. So anybody who has 3 shares should buy at least 1 share in the rights issue. This is how a typical rights issue is offered to your existing shareholders. And whenever you do a rights issue of more than 50 crores, you have to file a draft offer letter with SEBI, offer document with SEBI, or 50 crore plus rights issue. If you're doing less than that, you can directly file the final prospectus just like fast track issue. Obviously, the same criteria for fast track issue apply here also. No pending litigation, no allegations, no debarment from market, no fugitive economic offense. So basically, you should be a clean company. If you're clean enough, you can then seek the approval of SEBI in the draft prospectus. They will then approve your final prospectus, after which you will have to then seek the in-principle approval from the stock exchange. Whether you want to go to both the stock exchanges or only one, that is a call the company will make. Make sure that all your partly paid shares are converted into fully paid shares. Because if you want to raise more money from new shareholders or existing shareholders, first you collect the pending money from the partly paid shares. Because what is really a partly paid share? You still have money pending to be received from those shares. So if you already have pending money to be received, why the hell are you trying to raise more money by issuing more shares? First, collect the pending money. Make sure that all the shares are fully paid up. Make sure you make firm arrangements for 75%. You can only use 25% for general corporate purposes, and 35% you can use if you're trying to acquire another company or invest in any target company. So same rules as before. Then comes preferential issue. We have already seen there of 3 types. Your traditional preferential issue, your private placement, and your qualified institutional placement. Under Companies Act, you require a special resolution pretty much for every damn thing in the US. And for 60 to 70% of the questions, the answer is very straightforward. If you really have to think about it and summarize, if any question comes in the exam, the answer to that question is probably yes. Whether it's a procedural question, whether it's a tactical question, whether it's a scenario-based question, the answer is 70 to 80% of the time, yes, you could do it, but subject to conditions. You need to remember what those conditions are. That's all this journey is for you to get into CS professional. So remember, conditions are what are going to fetch you marks. But rather than focusing on marks, if you focus on writing skills, even if you don't have knowledge, you can convince the person correcting your paper that you have some knowledge, and they will be fooled enough to give you marks, and you will smoothly sail along to the next level. That's what I did in college. Trust me, I had no time to study all of this. My BCom exams were simultaneously occurring with my CS executive. I still remember I was in 4th semester. So morning 9:30 to 12:30 was my BCom exam. Finished that, take a bus from Vijaya College to St. Joseph's College near Malya Hospital. Get down while the bus is barely slowing down before it reaches Corporation, before Pallavi Theatre. Get down there, and by the time you run and reach St. Joseph's College, you'll have your dumb friend asking you, did you study this question, Macha? Is it going to come in the exam? Because last year it didn't come. You'll always find people like this ruining your progress. Don't listen to them. Nobody knows what's going to come in the exam. Neither me, neither you. Only about 20 people know what is going to come in the exam. Those 20 people are in the highest positions at ICSI, so they're not going to tell us what those questions are. Stop worrying about questions and try to use the minimum amount of knowledge that we have and portray it in such a way that you have much more knowledge than actually that you have. Because especially when you're in college, you don't have any understanding of what is actually required from you. You're just winging it, and many of you are probably still in college, which is great. But if you're not, then try to engage with the person correcting your paper. Don't write generic answers. As soon as somebody asks you what is fast track FPO, please don't quote regulation 155. Nobody wants to correct such a paper. As per regulation 155 of SEBI ICDL, nobody wants to even read it. People start puking as soon as they read that first line. Why will they give you marks? Right? I know you have the knowledge. You don't have to show it off everywhere. Come to the point, be concise, be clear in your communication, and nail your opinion. What do you think? Out of those 12 points, whichever point is your favorite point. Let's say you like the market capitalization point. Open with that. According to me, I feel market capitalization is the most important criteria for any company to be eligible to be considered for a fast track IPO. If you open with a line like that, any person who's disinterested in your paper is suddenly interested. And we barely get paid $100, not even 100 in some cases, to correct your paper. Obviously, I'm not eligible to correct any paper because I'm teaching you, which is the main reason why I teach, because the only time I went to correct papers, my brains were absolutely shattered. There will be a dungeon type room, 30 by 40, probably 1,200 square feet. There will be 2 rooms in that particular location. There will be thousands and thousands of paper from a particular region that will be dumped in the middle in covers. We can bring how many ever papers as we want to our houses, as long as we give back the corrected papers within the deadline. So I remember the minimum you can bring is 500. And we had about, I think, 10 days to correct those papers. Even if you do the math, in 10 days, if I have to correct 500 papers, that's 50 papers per day. Even if I spend 12 hours in a day to correct your papers, that's about, if I do, let's say, 10 minutes per paper, that's about how many? 6 papers in an hour. And if I work 8 hours, I'll do 48 papers. So let's say I do 9 hours and I finish 50 papers in a day. If I sit 9 continuous hours and correct your papers, I'm going to finish 50 papers in a day. I saw people correcting 2,000 papers in 10 days. I've seen that from my own eyes. I've seen people, some of them corrected 700, some of them corrected 800, some of them corrected 1,000. I'm not sure how they did it, but I felt very guilty correcting those papers because I don't think anybody should have the power to decide anybody else's future in 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. I don't think that's fair. But that's how the entire education system is. It's not your fault. That's how the education system was when I wrote the exam. It's going to be when your children are going to write the exam. None of this is going to really change. What can change is your writing style. So please do focus on it. Many times you'd be left wondering when a friend of yours who you feel is undeserving, how did they clear that exam. They clear that exam because they write better than you. Not because they're more intelligent than you, they write better than you. So that's the most important skill. So whenever you quote any point, write your opinion right there in the first paragraph. Then shift to quoting the regulations and the relevant points. Conclude with an example, a flowchart or a diagram. And if you recollect, and if a penalty is relevant, write about some penalty, or in some cases, you can come up with your own variation of a definition. This is how you should conclude. Conclusion cannot be very generic. So in a preferential issue, the only additional thing that you have to remember is in the last 90 days, if anybody has sold your shares, you cannot make a preferential issue to them. If somebody has the audacity to sell your shares in the last 90 days, why would you issue more shares to them? He just sold your shares, right? There is no logic of doing preferential issue to a person who just sold your shares. That is the most important point that you have to remember. No preferential issue will be made to any person who has sold your shares in the last 90 trading days. In addition to this, make sure that all the shares are fully paid up, just like rights issue. Make sure that if there are any convertible securities, they are fully converted. Make sure there are no pending litigations. And as I said, SR is pretty much the answer for everything in life. So get the special resolution going. You guys probably know the procedure for passing a special resolution. If not, I'm not sure whether I mentioned this somewhere or not. There's a very generic 7-step process for literally every other question in Companies Act, which is process-based. First, always convene board meeting, then pass board resolution, fix the date, time, venue for general meeting, finalize notice. Whenever there is special business, you also finalize explanatory statement. Convene the general meeting and pass special resolution or ordinary resolution. If it is a special resolution, file MGT 14. Sometimes some ordinary resolutions also require Form MGT 14. This is literally the answer for 35% of the questions in your company law exam. You just have to now present the answer in 10-15 different ways when you actually write the answer in your company law paper. So you can write special resolution in my paper. That's absolutely okay. But if you write the same answer in company law paper, you have to quote all the points. Board meeting requires 7 days advance notice minimum. It can be shorter. Board resolution requires at least 1/2 of majority. Date cannot be national holiday. Time has to be 9 to 6 p.m. Venue has to be city, town, or village where the registered office is located. Notice is sent 21 clear days before the meeting. Explanatory statement is required for special business. Special business is anything other than ordinary business. Ordinary business is of 4 types, which is adda. A for accounts, D for dividend, D for director appointment, A for auditor appointment. Anything apart from this is special business. What are we doing? We are doing QIP or we are doing preferential issue. Is this ordinary or is this special business? This is most definitely special business. And if it is special business, it requires explanatory statement. One more very interesting thing to note in Companies Act, usually when you have ordinary business, 95% of the time it is ordinary resolution. But whenever you have special business, 80% of the time it is special resolution, 20% of the time it is ordinary resolution. If you can just remember these 3 points, where do you pass which resolution, this process is going to be the same. So rather than writing special resolution like these people who wrote this textbook, you can now write 7 to 8 extra points compared to everyone else who's writing this paper. Don't just write this dumb one-liner. A a special resolution has been passed by shareholder. This is so generic. Tell the examiner, how the hell are you going to pass this special resolution? So what is the process once again? Step 1. What is this?
Board meeting.
Board meeting, pass board resolution. What is DTV?
Date, time, venue.
What is the date in which you cannot hold a general meeting?
National holiday. National.
What is the time in which you cannot hold a general meeting?
It should be 9 to 6. After 6.
And what is the venue in which you have to hold a general meeting? City, town or village. DTV has to match with your CTV, then only you will go for notice. Notice at least 21 clear days. Explanatory statement, do we require or not require for doing preferential issue? It is absolutely required. In that explanatory statement, what will you write? What, why, when, how much? This is the answer you will write in explanatory statement. What special issue are you doing? Why are you doing this issue? When are you planning to do the issue? Manu, I'm not able to hear you.
Minutes of meeting is also explanatory statement.
Minutes has got nothing to do with explanatory statement. Minutes happens after this. Minutes is a record of the meeting. Once the meeting gets over, you write what happened in the meeting. So that has got nothing to do with this. Yes, as a CS, you should know the art of writing minutes. But procedurally, just as an expert in corporate law, you don't really require that here. Explanatory statement is a statement which is attached with the notice, explaining why we are issuing these shares, when are we planning to issue, what type of shares are we issuing, how much of it are we issuing, and how it will be utilized. Basically, the major questions relating to the preferential issue will be answered not in the notice, but in the explanatory statement. Then you actually convene the general meeting, and in case of preferential issue, you pass special resolution. And then you file a form called MGT 14. When you learn Companies Act, you will know what is the relevance of this form, but this also you can write for preferential issue rather than writing this one point. All the shares should be in Demat, all the shares should be fully paid up, you should be in compliance with LODR regulations. It's the same nonsense for every issue. The only new thing is rights issue doesn't require SR, preferential issue requires SR, UIP also requires SR, private placement also requires SR, IPO doesn't require SR. And if you are doing FPO, you can only do it through rights issue or preferential issue. So even in QIP, you would notice the same thing repeated over and over and over again. Once again, they will tell you that you should pass an SR. Once again, they will tell you the share should be fully paid up. Once again, they'll tell you the same thing, so you don't have to worry too much about it. Now, if you're issuing an IDR is a very interesting concept. This is when a foreign company comes to India, visits BSc or NSC, let's take BSc in this case, and says, I want to establish a branch in India, or I want to expand my business in India. And rather than issuing equity shares, I'm going to issue a receipt. This receipt will be just like an equity share, but they cannot vote in my general meeting, but they will get dividend from my company. So a receipt, which is very similar to an equity share in terms of giving dividend, does not provide any voting rights is called as a depository receipt. And once the stock exchange says okay, they will approach NSDL or CDSL and make arrangements because they are the only two depositories in India. So technically speaking, there is nothing called as Indian depository receipts globally. No country recognizes Indian depository receipts at all. They only recognize GDR and ADR. So it's a method through which a foreign company enters the local domestic market and raises money from the local market using their employability and ability to generate employment. And these companies, if they go to any country in the world and do this, they are called as a GDR. But if they go to America and do it, then it is called as an American depository receipt. So if Infosys goes to Germany and raises funds, will we call that IDR? Or if a Google comes to India and raises money here, will we call it IDR? What do you think? Option 1 or 2?
Option 2.
Others? It is actually option 2. If Infosys goes to Germany, it is not going to raise IDR. It is going to use euros and it is going to generate euros by issuing this receipt. So it's not an American depository receipt, it will be a GDR. If Infosys goes to New York Stock Exchange and does this in America, then it will be called as an AD. So from Google's perspective, this is not an IDR. From Google's perspective, this is also a GDR. But from our perspective as Indians, since we want to verify every little thing that we do, we call this thing as a Indian depository receipt. Though globally there is no recognition for this, and neither does this law apply anywhere else in the world. We have put additional conditions here, same as before. 3 years track record, no prohibition, no non-compliance, no fugitive economic offender, same nonsense repeated again. Minimum issue size 50 crores, which is just like a rights issue. And also make sure that all the shares are ranking pari pasu. Pari pasu means not the name of some cow. Pari pasu means the shares that these receipts are going to give you after 2 or 3 years. IDR are based on shares, equity shares. IDRs will give you equity shares not now, let's say after 3 years. But during the 3 years, you will still receive dividend. And during the 3 years, you don't get any voting rights. That is what a IDR is going to be. Once they are converted into an equity share. So technically, it's a glorified convertible debenture or a convertible preference share because it pays dividend, not interest. Post conversion, they will have the same rights as the existing shares. So getting same ranking or getting same rights is what is called as pari passu. Same firm arrangements for 25 and 75 for general corporate purposes. From this chapter onwards, you will observe why studying this textbook is useless, because this is going to be page after page of repeated information. They could have just easily taken a fresh page, noted down 120 points, nicely bifurcated them into the 4 issues and said Tata bye. But they will not do it. They want all of us to suffer and rot in this 500-page textbook, of which 7 of them are there. So at least now you will realize that textbooks are not really going to help you beyond a few chapters. The first 5-6 chapters, I agree, they are reasonably useful. But even there, for each chapter, if you really sit down and make your own notes, you could summarize all those chapters just like we did in class, in about 1 hour or 2 hours time. Okay, let's assume you take 3 times as much time as I do. So in 3 hours, you could finish one chapter and you'll have your own version of your own notes. And it's always better to study our own notes than some random guys or random author's notes from someone else. The best case scenario is to make your own. Now, since you are doing issues of securities in this chapter, it will be remiss if we don't talk about small and medium enterprise. IPO is usually exclusively kept for the large organizations. Companies that are huge, companies that have a lot of financial potential where all the investors are ready to invest. But what about the small companies? Small companies also the same 4 points. Not debarred from accessing the market, not willful defaulter, not fugitive economic offender, not debarred from accessing the market as a company or a promoter. If you're a small or medium enterprise, the only thing you have to worry is you can raise only less than 10 crores. If you want to raise more than 10 crores from your IPO, up to 25 crores, then you can either go to SME stock exchange or you can go to the main stock exchange. If you are raising less than 10 crores, you can only go to the SME board. And if you are raising more than 25 crores, you have no option but to go to the main. So depending on the amount of money that you are raising in your IPO, you can decide which board or which segment of the stock exchange you will go and list your shares. You have to appoint all the primary market intermediaries as usual. 2 additional things is compulsory market making. Market making is a price stabilization mechanism. So if you raise 9 crore rupees by issuing 9 lakh shares of 100 rupees each, in that case, each share is 100 bucks. You have 9 lakh shares. 15% of this 9 lakh shares will be given to a stabilizing agent called as the market maker. Without telling you market making, chumma dealing to this point. So market making is where this stabilizing agent will get a loan of 15% of shares of this company and he will buy and sell the shares in a particular range between 100 to 120. So he will ensure that the price of your company shares don't fluctuate too much after the IPO is over. So in simple terms, that is what market making is. And this should be done for 3 years after listing. Minimum application size should be 1 lakh rupees since you're a small entity. And you can go to the main board, you can migrate if you pass a special resolution. Conditions remain the same: draft of a document, final of a document, fully paid shares, demat shares, 75% firm arrangement, 25% for general corporate purposes. By this time, you have read these 4 lines about 10 times, or at least 8 times in different areas. Imagine the amount of trees they have put to print this. Last comes IGP, which I feel is the most important topic in this chapter. Because this is the newest addition to all the stock exchanges where innovators are going to now raise money. Because of the trend of sharks and investments growing in India aggressively, you can raise money on this platform by displaying your technology startup, IT startup, intellectual property startup, data analytics startup, biotech, or nanotech startup. So limited areas are allowed here. So if you are coming up with any radical product or service, you can raise any amount of money. To be honest, the minimum amount you can raise is 10 crores and the minimum size of the lot is 2 lakhs. The minimum number of people that you have to allot the shares is 50, and you can or cannot list the shares. The choice is left with the company, which is very convenient. Till now we were seeing that if you do an IPO, you have to list the share. But since you are under IGP platform, you don't even have to list your shares. So you can remain an unlisted company, but you can keep raising money from the stock exchange as long as you ensure this one condition. The one condition is 25% of your capital should be held by QIB. Who are QIBs? Qualified institutional buyers. And there is a list of people who come under that. So if your company is trying to raise 10 crores and your pre-issue capital is 1 crore, 25% of that is 25 lakhs. 25 lakhs should be held by QIBs or IGP investors. There are exclusive investors who only invest in the IGP platform. Those investors should have held your shares for at least 1 year. If you satisfy this one condition, you can raise at least 10 crores from minimum 50 people with a lot size of 2 lakh rupees for your technological and IP data analytics based innovative products and services. Which brings us to the last issue, which is your bonus issue. Again, bonus issue, the only condition is again fully paid shares, no fugitive economic offenders. Shares should be dematted. Make sure that the shares are fully paid up. Make sure that your MOA, AOA allow you to issue bonus shares. And you can only use certain reserves for capitalization of this particular issue. You don't need SR, you only need OR to do bonus. So that is something that is different. So no pending cases, no pending litigation, no fugitive economic offender, no serious offences, and no statutory dues of employees is remaining unpaid. To satisfy all of this, you can give free shares to your shareholders and you can increase your share capital. Just make sure that once you start the issuing process, you finish it in 15 days. You end up finishing the issue in 15 days time. Make sure all the conditions are satisfied. Once you announce a bonus issue, you cannot withdraw it. All other issues can be withdrawn before this. So that brings us to the conclusion of this chapter. Every chapter has lesson roundup like this. Probably the most important part of every chapter. So always, whenever in doubt, read the lesson roundup at the end of the chapter to understand these things in a simplified manner. And important terms include book building, net worth, basis of allotment, general corporate purpose for which we use 25% of the money, offer for sale, which means promoters and other existing shareholders sell their shares to you rather than you issuing new shares as a company. Price band is the range within which a price of a security moves. Selling shareholders are those shareholders who sell their shares in a public issue, which is part of your offer for sale. That is the end of ICDR regulations. Most definitely 6 to 12 marks in most exams. Historically, that has been the case, but once every 3 to 4 years, they will ask for 0 marks. So when I actually wrote the exam, none of the questions came from this chapter. Because every time we end up predicting these question papers, right? Our only job is astrology. We are not students. We will predict what will come in the exam. So when we are into astrology, we will be reminded that we can check the question paper, and purposefully they will not ask a single question from this chapter once every 3 to 4 years. So if you're unlucky enough or lucky enough, depending on your preparation, you might get 0 marks from this chapter.